Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi shir.
Shalom, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Lamed Gimel. We're on Lamed Beis Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara, Ba'avoin hagezel, for the sin of robbery. Now the Bryce will continue listing for us various consequences for specific averis. Ba'avoin gezel, on account of the sin of robbery. Hagoyva yoyle, locusts, grasshoppers come around and they devour the produce, and it brings about hunger. V'harav hoiva, as a result there's hunger, and out of desperation, uvnei adam oichlem b'sar b'nei b'nei, people eat the flesh of their children. Shenemar shima davar zeh, listen to this word, paris habashan, the cows of Bashan, asher b'har shomron, ha'oishkos dalim, who oppress the poor, ha'roitzitzois of yoinim, who crush the needy. Amarava Kigoin, what is an example of people who resort to stealing and robbery? Hani nashi the Mechayza, the women of the town of Mechayza, the achlan v'lo avdan. They consume, they eat, but they don't produce, they don't contribute to the family income, as apparently was their custom in those days. V'oid, another pshat said Rashi, they lead a pampered, extravagant lifestyle, which compels their husbands to resort to stealing in order to support them. And what is the consequence? V'uksiv hikisi eschem b'shidafon v'yirakoin. I will strike you with wind-blown crops, ruined crops, v'yirakoin, full of mildew. Harbois gineseichem v'garmeichem, the multitude of your gardens and your vineyards, v'tainechem, and your figs, v'zeichem, and your olives, yoichal hagazam, the locusts will eat. Uksiv, we see from another pasuk that gazam is only the beginning. Many more different types of gazam is a locust. So many different variations and species come around. Uksiv, yeser hagazam, achala arbe, it's another type of grasshopper. V'yeser arbe, achala yelek, and the remnants of the arbe, the yelek came around to eat. V'yeser yelek, achala chasa, and the remnants that the yelek left over, the chasal will come around to eat. So the various species of grasshoppers, and that is all included in the Kollel, the curse of Yochel Hagazam, stated in the first pasuk, which is as a result of the pasuk earlier, which discusses the gezel. So we see that locusts and grasshoppers and all their forms and variations comes as a consequence for stealing. Uksiv, another pasuk says, "Vayigzor al yamin v'roiv." He'll go and snatch from his right side, and he'll still be hungry. Al smoil v'saveyu, they'll eat from their left side, still not be satiated. So there won't be enough food, there'll be famine, and as a result, ish b'sar zroya yoichelu, a person will eat the flesh of his arm, al tikri b'sar zroya, rather than b'sar zroya, his flesh of his arm, el basa zari, the flesh of his children. So we have all three consequences. As a result of gezel, we have the locust, which comes, it brings about hunger, and finally, as a result, people will eat the flesh of the children out of desperation. Continues the Gemara about avoin ini adin, for the transgression, for the avoin of ini adin, of prolonging unnecessarily the issuing of the verdict of the din, the ivis adin, and for the aver of willingly corrupting the din, the kilkul adin, ruining the outcome of the din. This wasn't done willingly, but out of negligence, out of laziness. The dayanim, the judges, fail to properly analyze the case and come to a proper conclusion. So they come to a kilkul adin. They ruin the verdict. It's an incorrect verdict. So ba'avoin, all these things, as a consequence of all these averis, ubidal Torah, a neglect of Torah study. So what does this result in? It results in 5 things: cherev, sword. Ubiza rab, sword and looting increases. V'dever, and plague. Ubat soiris. Soiris is when there is a lack of rain, famine. Ba, it comes. Ubnei adam oichlem and usveim. This is another klal of people eat and not be satiated, not be full. V'oichlem lachva mishkal. They'll have very little bread. They'll have to weigh the bread. That's how little they'll have. They'll eat it after weighing it to figure out exactly how much they're going to be eating in order not to use up their supply. I'll bring upon you cherev nekemes, a sword of vengeance, nekam bris, in order to take revenge for bris, for you're not complying with bris. What is bris? And bris ala Torah. Bris is referring to learning Torah. Shenemar am bris yom v'layla is referring to Talmud Torah. Uksiv, and it says b'shivri lachem mati lechem, I'll break your staff, your support of bread. V'afu es noshim, 10 women will break the bread, and the pasuk continues. They'll bake it in one oven, and they'll receive it back. B'mishkal, they'll have to weigh it. That's how little they'll be. Uksiv yanu biyan mishpatay ma'asu. And this is as a result of the fact that they neglected, they were moyes, they revolted against my mishpatim. And here we have the 5 Einshim as a result. The first pasuk discusses cherev, nekemes, nekam bris. That's cherev, and that brings about the biza as well. The goyim will loot the Jewish properties, and in that pasuk there is a mention of dever as well, plague. So we have the cherev, we have the dever, we have the biza, and then we have the description of the shortage of food. And finally they'll have to actually weigh their bread. That's how little they'll have. Continues the Gemara about Voin Shvu Hashav, on account of the sin of a oath in vain. Rashi says this means that it's something which is obviously false. He makes a shvu, he swears that an ish is actually an isha. That's Shvu Hashav. Uba Voin Shvu Sheker, saying a false oath, which is not something which is so obvious to all, but he's doing it to deceive somebody. That's Shvu Sheker. V'chil Hashem, on desecrating Hashem's name. V'chil Shabbos, v'mechal Shabbos. What is the consequence of these averis? Says the Gemara, there are 4. Chayra Rabba, wild animals increase, ubehema Kollel, and they devour the behemoths. Uvnei Adam Mismatin, and the inhabitants will dwindle as a result. V'adracham ishtoimimin, and the ways, the highways will become desolate. Shenemar v'im be'ela lo yisavasruli, with if through all these, this is in the Teichacha, as a result of these Einshim lo yisavasruli will not straighten out and turn back to me. I'll take you be'ela. Instead of bringing the word be'ela in these, ela be'allah. Allah is a shvua. So as a result of abusing shvua and oath, what comes as a result of that? I will send forth in you the wild animals, and the pasuk continues that they will devour the behemoths. It will make you dwindle, and your ways will become desolate. That's the conclusion of that pasuk. So we have these items that are mentioned above. We have the chayara, we have the behema Kollel, we have the adam mismatim, we have the dracham ishtaimim, all included in this pasuk. And the pasuk continues, and the Gemara continues. How do we know that this same concept applies not only to abusing of the shvua, but to the others as well? Chil Hashem and Chil Shabbos. It says when we learn it from Gzeir Shava. Ubechil Hashem ksiv, ksiv b'shvua hashav. And regarding shvua hashav, it says v'shishamvu b'shmila shakar. You may not make a shvua sheker. V'chilalta Hashem alekecha. So this is a chil Hashem, the desecration of Hashem's name. So we find the term chilul in relation to abusing the shvua. Uvechil Hashem ksiv, and regarding the desecration of Hashem's name, it also uses the word chilul, ksiv le'sechal Hashem kachi. Now Rashi explains, what is chilul Hashem? He says, for example, Adam Gadol, a prominent, important person that people look up to, and he doesn't conduct his life appropriately. He's not nizar b'mas, he's not careful with his actions. For instance, he neglects to observe certain mitzvahs, etc. Or even in midas, he doesn't conduct himself properly, socially. And as a result, the population who looks up to him for guidance and example, they learn from his example, and they conclude that apparently keeping these particular mitzvahs that he's not careful with is not important, and it lowers the value of these things in their eyes as well. This is a chil Hashem. So once again, in chil Hashem, regarding chil Hashem, the Torah uses the word v'sechal Hashem kachi. And in chil Shabbos as well, we see b'chil Shabbos v'mechaleleo ma'isumas. So we learn all these. We learn chil Hashem and chil Shabbos, which contain the term chilul. We learn it from v'yolav chilul chilul mishva sheker with Gzeir Shava, from shva sheker. So the same consequence that applies to shva sheker with those 4 items. The chayra bara, they devour the behemoths. B'nei adam mismatim, hadrachim, the highways become desolate. So this applies to abuse to transgressing chil Hashem and also chil Shabbos. Continues the Gemara about Avoin Shvichas Damim, for the Aveira of Shvichas Damim, murder. What is the consequence? Beis Hamikdash Charav. The Beis Hamikdash gets destroyed. The Shechina Mistalekes Yisrael, and the Shechina gets removed from Klal Yisrael. Shenemar B'Leitzachni V'Sa'aretz. The pasuk there is discussing Shvichas Damim. Now, don't bring guilt onto the land, Eretz Yisrael. Beis Tamei Sa'aretz, and don't be Metamei Eretz Yisrael Asher Atem Yeshim Ba. The land that you sit in it, that you'll dwell in it, Asher Ani Sheichem B'Sacha, that I too dwell in it. So we learn from there that if they're not careful with this, Ha'im Atem Metamem Oisef, you indeed are Metamei Eretz Yisrael, you defile Eretz Yisrael through Ritzicha and Shvichas Damim. Einechem Yeshim, what is the result? You will not remain in there. Va'eini Sheichem B'Sacha, and I too will not have my Shechina rest there. So we see both consequences of the Beis Hamikdash being Charav and the Shechina Mistalekes Yisrael. Continues the Gemara about Boin Gili Arayos. On account of Gili Arayos, V'avedis Kechavim, V'ashmata Shmitim V'yoyles, cessation of the observance of the Shemitah and Yovel. What comes as a result? Golus B'Lo'olam. So Golus, exile, comes about. U'maglin Oisan, and the Nachrim, the Goyim, exile the Yidden from Eretz Yisrael. Born Achayrim, V'yoshim Mekayman, and others. The Nachrim, the Goyim, will come and sit, will take their place in Eretz Yisrael. Shenemar, ki eskola ta'evos ha'el oshu anshe ha'eretz. All these ta'evos, all these abominations, the people of Eretz Yisrael did, and as a result, uksiv vatitma eretz, so the land became defiled, va'efkoid avaneleo, and as a result of these averas that the Goyim did, what happened? Uksiv v'leisaki eretz eschem b'tamachem oisa. So what happened was that as a result of the defilement of Eretz Yisrael, the Goyim did all these types of averos of Gili Arayos. So what happened? They defiled Eretz Yisrael, and Hashem chased them out. The pasuk says that Vatakia Eretz Esheshvia, the land spit out its inhabitants, and therefore the Torah warns us as well. Uksiv v'sakia eretz eschem b'tamachem oisa. You shouldn't follow their lead. Don't follow their example, because if you are metamei Eretz Yisrael through Gili Arayos, you too will be expelled from Eretz Yisrael. So we see that the consequence of Gili Arayos is being exiled from Eretz Yisrael. So that's Gili Arayos. What about Avodas Kechavim? Says the Gemara about Avodas Kechavim ksiv. V'nosati tzpigrechem, describing Avodah Zarah ksiv hashimoisim sheichem. So your Mikdash become desolate, ksiv, and then it says ve'eschem ezorah v'goyim. So one pasuk says that your Mikdash will become desolate, and you will be strewn about amongst the nations, and the Goyim will come take your place and sit in Eretz Yisrael instead of you. So you see, that is the consequence, that is the einish on account of Avodah Zarah. What about Shmitim v'Yovelos? When we don't observe those halachos, what happens? Ksiv. So when you're in the land of your enemies, when you were exiled from Eretz Yisrael, then the land will make up for all the Shmitas, will atone for the Shmitas that it lost when you didn't observe it while you were sitting on it. All the days that it's desolate from your presence, it will indeed rest and make up for the Shemitah and V'yelos that were not observed. Continues the Gemara about Voy Nivlus Peh, on account of defilement of speech, speaking inappropriately. What happens? Tzoros Rabos, calamities increase. V'gzeres Koshes V'tzchachos, and severe decrees become implemented. Ubachurei Son Yisrael Mesim, and the young men of Klal Yisrael die. So Bachurei Son Yisrael, the enemies of Klal Yisrael, is a euphemism for the Bachurim of Klal Yisrael. And finally, Yisoimim V'almonos, Tzoy Akin V'einenen. Orphans and widows will cry out to Hashem and will not be answered. Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk Al Kain, Bachurav La'yismach Hashem. Hashem will not be happy with his with the young men. V'sisoima v'salmonosav le'yirachim, and will not have a mercy on the Yisoim, the Almonos, the orphans and the widows. So Rashi says that the first part, Al Kain Al Bachurav La'yismach Hashem, refers to the tzoros and the gzeres that will increase, that will come about. And the second part, the Yisoim and Almonos, will not have mercy on them, will not listen to their outcry. And why is that? This all is a result of Kikuloi, Choneif, Umareya, because it's full of chanev, guilt and bribery, umareya and bad. V'chol peh doiver nevala, because all mouths are speaking nevala, nivul peh, inappropriate speech. V'chol zois loishav apai, throughout all this, his anger hasn't turned away. V'yodin, and his hand is still outstretched. So we see once again that for nivul peh, there is a einish of tzores and gzeres, and Bachur Yisrael die, and the Yisrael Almanis are ignored. Says, well, what does these last three words mean? V'oid netuya. My v'oid netuya. Says the we make a drasha. The word v'oid resembles the word v'oid, which means forever. Omer Rav Chanan bar Rava. The pasuk means as follows: HaKol yoidin, all know. Everybody knows why a bride goes into the chuppah to get married. However, one who chooses to express it with his mouth, that is nivul peh. El kol hamanavel piv. Afilu choismin olav gzardin shel shivim shana l'toiva. Even if the person is so righteous, performed many good deeds, and as a result they sealed for him a favorable gzardin, favorable decree of 70 years l'toiva, which means throughout his whole life he should experience goodness. 70 years is the lifespan of a person. So va'ed yadin means va'ed, even if for va'ed, for the entire lifespan, for the entire life, he has a gzeira l'tov, he's meant to live a good life, and he chooses to defile his mouth. They substitute that gzardin l'tova, and in its place they put a bad decree. They reverse the gzardin l'tova, even if it's such a significant gzardin, it was meant to last throughout his whole lifetime. Nevertheless, he incurs punishment on account of his nivul peh. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Shila Mar Chizda, Kol ha'manavel es piv, ma'amikin legehenim. He suffers this type of consequence. They create a deep pit for him in Gehenim. They are ma'amik Gehenim, they make it deeper for him. Shenema shucha amuka pizoris, a deep pit for the pizoris, the mouth, which is strange, meaning it speaks divrei nivul peh. Even if one hasn't actually expressed pervert language, but he heard, and he was shoisik, and he was silent, he also will incur the same consequence of this deep level of Gehenna. Shnemar Zu'um Hashem Yipol Sham. So this is referring to even one who is merely sham, merely there, present, while this type of inappropriate speech is being spoken, and he chooses to ignore it, he doesn't protest. He too belongs in that same place. Zu'um Hashem, he's also aboard by Hashem, Yipol Sham, he will fall in there. Now, why is merely listening to this type of speech considered to be so severe? After all, he hadn't expressed anything wrong. Perhaps this could be explained based on the words of Mesilas Yesharim, who explains the concept of inappropriate speech of nivul peh. He says, just like we know there's znus, morality, b'masa, through action. Says the Mesilas Yesharim, it has a similar concept, a similar principle applies to the other senses of a person. We have eyesight, we have speech, we have the ability to hear. Says the Mesilas Yesharim, although doesn't actually commit the actual physical act of immorality through speech, through eyesight, through hearing, nevertheless, he says, speaking inappropriately about inappropriate matter is akin, is equivalent, is as though he is doing znus, committing the act of znus with his mouth. That is considered to be znus hapeh. That's tumas hapeh. It's not merely a concern for what it might lead to. It might lead to inappropriate thoughts, etc. It's the actual speech, the nivul peh, which is considered to be like an act of znus, committed with his mouth. Similarly with his eyes, or with his hearing. So if one uses the power of shmiya, the sense of hearing, to hear nivul peh, even though he hadn't physically said anything, he hadn't actually committed a maisa, nevertheless that's considered to be znus ha'oizen, and therefore he endures a similar consequence. Continues the Gemara, Amar Vaishya, call him a marik atzmi la'aver, one who sets aside his schedule and dedicates himself to go ahead and do avera. Now, whenever we speak about avera, the stam lashon avera in Gemara is referring to immorality. So if one actually seeks, he goes and he dedicates himself to it. Various types of wounds surface on him. Shenemar chaburis petza tamruk bira. Not only that, el shanidim b'hadroikin. He's judged with his sickness called hadroikin. Shenemar umakos chadri batan. So he will get afflicted with this affliction of chadri batan in his innards. Farshim says connected mida. Morality is connected with a person's innards. So that is the consequence of this type of behavior. Oh, Nachmar Yitzchak, simon la'avera. There's something which is an indication, is simon, for a person who's involved in avera, and that is hadroikin. That is this type of sickness we just mentioned. Tana Rabbanan, there are three types of hadroikin. Gimel mini hadroikin hein. Shel avera, something which comes as a result of immorality, avera, ava, that produces ava, a thickness. His flesh is thick. It gets bloated and it becomes thick. The sholrav tafuach, the hadroikin which comes as a result of starving oneself, that's merely bloated. It's Rashi says it appears to have. It looks like there's mayim bentayim. There's water inside his flesh, so it's bloated. It becomes transparent. You see the water. So that's a different type of hadroikin. Shal kshafim. The hadroikin, which is a result of kshafim, sorcery, is dak. He ends up with basar dak, thin flesh. So there are three different variations of this illness. It says in Shmuel hakatan chashpe. So he was afflicted with this illness, with this hadroikin, and he was concerned. He's concerned perhaps about Chil Hashem. Amar Ribono Shel Olam, mi meifis. Who will cast a lot to determine what was the cause of this hadroikin? Perhaps people will speculate that I'm afflicted with this hadroikin as a result of aveira, of immorality. Itzi, indeed, Hashem cured him. Abaye chashbe. Abaye too was inflicted with this hadroikin. Amar Rava declared, Yodana ben Achmeni. I know regarding Abaye, who was called Achmeni, I know that the reason why he was afflicted with this hadroikin, the mach benafshe, because he starves himself. So he has the hadroikin as a result of the Rav. Continues to go on, Rav himself was afflicted with this hadroikin. Says more, how can that be so? Rabbi was careful to maintain his health properly, not to starve himself, not to resist relieving oneself, which are two causes of this hadroikin. Says more, how could this be that Rava was chaspe? For Rava the Amar, wasn't it Rava who declared nefishi kaltile keder menefiche kafan? There are more people that die as a result of spilling. Keder is a pot which spills, referring to the intestinal system which discards the waste. So a person that resists relieving oneself, that can result in this hadroikin as well. So Rava declared that it's very dangerous to resist relieving oneself, and in fact the consequence is death, can be death. So there are more people that died from that type of behavior than ones whose flesh was bloated, who had the hadroikin as a result of kafan, of starving himself. So apparently Rava disliked any of these behaviors and discouraged any of these types of behaviors. So how can it be that Rava himself was struck with hadroikin? Says more, Shani Rava was different. The Ansila Rabbanon, that the Rabbanon, his students, they forced him to stay at the lecture. They prolonged the lecture b'idnei when he was giving his shir bal karch, against his will. So they kept him there longer, and he was forced to withhold from relieving himself, and as a result, he incurred this type of hadroikin. Continues in Tana Rabbanon, Dalet Simanim him. There are four things that are indicative of a different type of things. Number one, simon la'avera. What is a simon? Something which is indicative of avera. Hadroikin, as we just mentioned. Simon l'sinas chinam. What is indicative? What is a symptom of baseless hatred? Yirakin, jaundice. What is a simon for gasas aruach, for arrogance and gaiva? Anius, being poor. Rashi says we're speaking about intellectual poverty, because a person who is arrogant, he doesn't allow himself to lower himself and listen to others that are expressing words of Torah properly. He doesn't allow himself to analyze and to delve into it. He knows it all. In fact, he also he's discouraged from reviewing and chazering his learning. He relies on his ability to retain his learning. So he ends up indeed being poor, intellectually poor, devoid of Torah. Siman lashon hara. What is a symptom of lashon hara, slander, askara? This type of sickness, as Rashi says, it begins in the insides of Neimi'ayim, and it grows and it spreads over to the gorain, to the throat. So this is something which is a midah keneged midah, measure for measure, a einish lashon hara, which is committed with the throat, with the mouth. So the consequence is askara. Tonar Rabbanan askara b'la'olam. This askara, the sickness, severe sickness, comes as a result ala ma'aser, from neglecting, removing, separating the trumas and maasers from his produce, and that again is midah keneged midah, the produce which is forbidden and is eaten through the throat into the intestines, endures the he incurs the einish of askara, which is also related to those organs. So this is the shita of the Tanna Kamma. Rab Lezer Yosi Omer, lashon hara comes as a result of lashon hara. Once again, lashon hara is spoken with the mouth, the throat, and therefore the askara, which is related to that organ, is the fitting consequence. Amar Rava v'tema v'shulman Levi. Micro, what is the source of this connection between askara, the sickness, and lashon hara? The pasuk Tehillim says, "V'melach yismach v'elikim yisalol kol anishbaboy ki yisacher p'dover shaker." So the mouths of the dover shaker, speaking the slander, speaking about false slander, but lashon hara we know is even regarding true facts. So as Rashi, the yisacher means closing up of the mouth, and Rashi says that yisacher is similar to the word askara. Askara, the root of askara, sounds like yisacher. So indeed, we have a source, a remes, a makar, that the askara is paralleled with lashon hara. Iboilu, says the Gemara, let's analyze this. The Tanna Kamma says askara comes on account of eating food which meiser was not removed from. Rather, Yossi adds lashon hara. Is it coming to dispute the Tanna Kamma and say, well, askara only comes on account of lashon hara? Is it coming to add and say can come as a result of meiser and also as a result of lashon hara? Iboilu, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi al lashon hara ka'amar. Does he insist specifically lashon hara, or perhaps af al lashon hara nami ka'amar? He means to say also, even as a result of lashon hara. Tashma, let's listen to this right. When our teachers, our Rabbi Seinu, entered the kerem in Yavna, this was the Beis Medrash in Yavna, where they sat in rows, which was reminiscent of the rows of a vineyard. Why did they arrange their seating in that manner? The Darius Rishonim explains something very interesting, that the yeshiva in Yavna was established before the Churban by Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai, who was granted special permission from the Romans to do so. Now they would never allowed it to be established if they would have realized that it was going to be a Sanhedrin, a body of authority for Klal Yisrael. Therefore, they need to change the seating arrangement. It was meant to be different than the Sanhedrin, where they sat in a semicircle. So they arranged that they should sit in simple rows, which were reminiscent of a simple ordinary lecture, and did not resemble the Sanhedrin. So the Kerem b'Yavna was the yeshiva in Yavna, and when Rabbi Seinu entered that yeshiva, they came to that yeshiva. Hayasham, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon. So these three were present: Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon, who was actually Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Nishala shela zu b'fneim. So this question was posed to them: Makazu, this affliction, this askara, mitpnei ma maschelas b'nei me'ayim. Why does it begin initially with the intestines and it proceeds, it spreads over the gemeris of pet and concludes in one's mouth? How do we understand the process of this? What's the message here? What's the parallel? The midah keneged midah to the avera that it's coming to atone for and to avenge for. Says the Gemara, Nene Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi, and he said as follows. So he was referred to as the Rosh HaMadar M'chal Mokem. Why? Why was the Riddim Eloi considered to be the Rosh HaMadar, the first speaker in every place, in every occasion? The Gemara later will explain this was on account of a governmental decree by the Romans. He was meant to be the first speaker in every occasion. Says the Gemara once again, Nena Rabbi Yehuda Eloi. So he began speaking, he responded to the question, and he was referred to as Rosh HaMadar, the first speaker at every occasion. V'omar, and he said as follows. Let me explain why the askara develops himself in such a manner. Even though the kidneys, they advise a person how to proceed, how to act. V'leiv maven, and the heart discerns. V'losha machatech, the tongue articulates. Peh goimer. The mouth actually finishes and expresses the words. So Rashi explains that since askara comes as a consequence of speaking lashon hara, so the process of lashon hara begins with the kloyos down in the kidneys, who begin the process. However, it proceeds and through the body and ends up with the mouth. Therefore, the askara also begins initially in the innards of a person and then proceeds over to the mouth. So this is midah keneged midah. This was his, Rabbi Yehuda bar Elai's explanation. Neder Rabbi Eliezer bar Yosi v'amar. Rabbi Eliezer bar Yosi responded as follows: how come askara proceeds and develops in this manner? Because people eat with these organs, non-kosher food. So food which is eaten with the mouth, down through the throat, into the intestines, those organs suffer the consequence. Says Gemara, can you propose that askara death comes as a result of eating non-kosher foods? How could that be? That's not the appropriate oynish for death. Is not meant to be meted out for somebody who eats non-kosher food. That's too severe. Ella, rather, what he meant to say was that they eat with these organs produce which is not properly, the mitzvahs of Tumas and Ma'aser, not properly observed, and it is still considered to be tevel. And indeed, as Rashi says, the oynish of tevel is misa b'dei shemayim, so one is liable to death, which is in this case askara. So you have two approaches. What is the oynish askara paralleling? Either it is keneged lashon hara or keneged eating tevel. Nener Shimon Chai. Nener Shimon v'amar. Here's the third one, and he responded as follows: askara comes as a result of avoin b'tul Torah, which also is connected to one's mouth, speaking words of Torah. So on account of neglecting words of Torah, askara will also can surface. Rashi says another source. We know that this was mentioned yesterday, that the pasuk says, "L'man yirbu yumeichem," at the end of the second parsha of Krishma, your days will be prolonged, and this is referring to what's mentioned earlier in the parsha of "Limadtem es b'neichem," learning Torah. So we see that neglect of learning Torah can result in death. Amaloi, so the others challenged him, how could you propose that Bittul Torah is the cause, the catalyst of this askara? But Bittul Torah, the mitzvah of learning Torah, is directly, specifically at men. However, we find that even women can suffer this ailment. Nashim yechichu, the askara, which is present even by women who are exempt from Torah, will disprove you. You can't say it's connected to Torah. How then does it surface by women? So he answered and he says, no, I maintain that it's connected to Bittul Torah. However, women as well, Shema Vatler says Baleim, they disrupt their husband from learning. So they too are guilty for Bittul Torah. What about Nachim Echichu? Non-Jews will disprove you. They are not Mechuyev in Torah. Why do they get askara? So he said Shema Vatler Yisrael, because they disrupt Yidden from learning. Little children will disprove you because they get askara, even though they're certainly not obligated in Mitzvahs Talmud Torah. So he said, they disrupt their father from learning. They are a proof, because they're sitting and learning in school. Why did they get askara? Says the Gemara, that's a unique thing. Hassam over there, the explanation is as follows. Because Rav Gurion, as Rav Gurion told us, the Omar of Gurion, some say it was Vitem Rav Yosef or Ishmaya, that the Tinekes Shabbos Rabban, they experience einish and punishment, not on account of their own averis, but as a result of Klal Yisrael. They come to atone for Klal Yisrael. They're so chashav and so unique and so special. Klal Yisrael's sustenance is based on them. They derive schusim from the schus of these Tinoikish Shabbos Rabban, and indeed Hashem will sometimes punish Klal Yisrael by applying the einish to the Tinoikish Shabbos Rabban, who are the source of the Klal Yisrael's merits and lifeblood. As he explained, Bizman Tzadikim B'dor, when the righteous people are present in the generation, in that case, Tzadikim Nitfas Malador, righteous people will become ensnared by the Aver of the Dor, and the Einish will be directed to Tzadikim. But in the case when there are no tzaddikim, ain't tzaddikim b'dor, no tzaddikim present generation, what will happen then? Tinoika shbeis rabban etfasim alador. The little school children, they will become ensnared in the einish and the aver of the dor. Some say Shimon ben Zura. Micro, where do we find this concept in a pasuk? A pasuk in Shir Shirim. As Rashi explains, go ahead and get mercy, ask Rachmanis. And the schus of the ikve, the heel, the foot, the feet of the tzayin of the sheep, the aves and the schus of the aves, our forefathers, who are the stronghold, the foundation, our feet, that we depend on them, we rest on them. So beg mercy on their behalf, on their schus. And the pasuk continues, pasture your young your goats al mishkan esaroim, so that they not be taken as collateral, they not be considered to be a mashkoin haroim on account of the roim, the shepherds of Klal Yisrael. V'amrina says the Gemara, Gediyim hamemushkanim al roim, the young ones who are considered to be collateral on the roim for the leaders of Klal Yisrael. If there are no leaders in Klal Yisrael, they will be considered collateral, they will come in their place. So we see that the concept of einish for Klal Yisrael, the atonement of Klal Yisrael, is applied to either the leaders, if we have them, but otherwise it can be applied to the youngsters in Klal Yisrael, the Tedek Shveis Rabban. Explains the Maharal, how is this so? How could it be that the leaders, the tzaddikim, or the Tedek Shveis Rabban will suffer on account of all of Klal Yisrael? Explains the Maharal, we're not separate beings. Klal Yisrael are not separate entities. Each person is not considered to be an entity on his own, but rather we're all connected. We're considered as one body, as the Yerushalmi says, we're all one guf echad. If so, explains the Maharal, sometimes when Hashem will want to apply einish to this guf echad, this one entity, this own body of Klal Yisrael, where does he direct the einish? To the vital organ of Klal Yisrael, to the lifeblood of this guf. By doing so, he atones. It's an atonement, like kapara. It cleanses the rest of the guf. And that is the tzaddikim shebadar. Otherwise, it's the shneikish beis rama shebadar, the youngsters who are sitting and learning. And in their merit, in their schus, Klal Yisrael is sustained. So they too are considered to be the lifeblood of Klal Yisrael, the vital organs of Klal Yisrael, and the einish sometimes are applied to them to atone for Klal Yisrael. In any case, we see that from this discussion, that the Askara, according to Reb Lezer, Reb Yosi, comes as a consequence, as we saw in the second wide line, he said, and as the Gemara interpreted to mean the Dvarim she'enim mesukam, the Tevel, where the Tumas and Maisis were not observed properly, were not separated. So you see that Reb Lezer, Reb Yosi connects it to Tevel. Now, if we take a look back up on the beginning of the Amid, the top line, there seems to be a contradiction. Over here he says it comes because of Meiser. There he says because of Lashon Hara. So this indeed is a conclusion. This is a resolution to our question. We had a Shaila. What is the meaning of Lezer Yesi when he said Lashon Hara? Does he mean only Lashon Hara? Or did he mean to intend to add to Tanakama? Tanakama says Asur comes on account of Meiser. Did he come to add to that and say Af Lashon Hara also, even on Lashon Hara? Meaning it could come on account of two reasons, Ma'is and Lashon Hara, or did he mean strictly, specific Lashon Hara? We see very clearly from this discussion of the story of Karen B'Yavna that Reb Lezer B'Yosi holds, he maintains that Askara comes on one of two things. It could come on account of Lashon Hara, as he said earlier, but also on account of Ma'is. Shma Mino Af Lashon Hara Nami Kama Shma Mino. Now when he said Lashon Hara, he meant also Lashon Hara, even Lashon Hara. But there are two reasons in which the Askara can result in. Continues the Gemara. So the first man, the Amar Rabbi Yehuda, was given the title of Roish Hamadar B'Chamakim. He was the head speaker, the first speaker for every occasion. Explains the Gemara, how did that come about? V'amai Kollel, why did they call him Roish Hamadar B'Chamakim? Says the Gemara, this was a result of the following incident. The Yasvi, they were sitting, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Shimon. So these three tzaddikim were sitting together. Rabbi Yehuda, the one mentioned earlier, Rabbi Yosi mentioned earlier, and Rabbi Shimon, again mentioned earlier, this is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. and they had their fourth attendee there. V'Yosef Yehuda ben Gerim Gabayu. So Yehuda, who was the son of converts, was sitting by them, and they began to speak. Pasach Rabbi Yehuda v'Amar. So Yehuda began the discussion, and he declared, Kama noim ma'aseim shmuazu. How wonderful are the deeds of this ummah, this nation, the Romans, who were in power at that time. Look what they did. Tiknu shvakim, they established marketplaces. Tiknu gisharim, they built bridges. Tikrum achatzoyis, bathhouses. Look how wonderful their deeds are. Rabbi Yossi shasak. Rabbi Yossi didn't negate the compliment, but he remained silent. Nen Rav Shimon bar Yochai v'amar. Rav Shimon bar Yochai couldn't tolerate this compliment. He protested. He said as follows: Kol ma shetiknu, whatever they were established, all the good things that they did, lo yitiknu el tzarech asmen. They didn't do it for Hashem, for Klal Yisrael. They did it for their own needs, for their own sake. For instance, tiknu shvakim, they established marketplaces. Lo yishven zoynais, to sit down, to populate it with zoynais, with immoral women. Merchatzois, bathhouses, la'adibran atzman, for their own enjoyment, to beautify themselves, la'adibran atzman, to derive pleasure and enjoyment in the Beis HaMerchatz. Gisharim, why did they build bridges? Litim meches, for the tolls. So he negated the compliment and denigrated the Romans. Halach Yehuda ben Gerim. So Yehuda ben Gerim went ahead, v'siba devreim, and he related this conversation to his associates without any intention, of course, of spreading it and getting it back to the Romans. But eventually, somehow, the words, the proceeding, this conversation ended up, v'nishmu malchus, was heard b'malchus, to the government, to the Romans. Amru, and as a result, they said as follows: Yehuda she'ila, Yehuda who elevated and praised us, Yis'ala, he too will be elevated, and they gave him this authority to be the Rosh HaMadabrim, the first speaker for every occasion. Yosi sheshasak, Yosi, who remained silent, who didn't seem to actively support and complimenting the Romans, Yigal Tzipori, he will have a punishment, not a severe punishment. He will be sent to exile to go to Tzipori. Shimon Shegina, Shimon Echai, who denigrated the Romans, who negated them, Yehorik, he'll be executed. So what do you do? Says the Gemara, Azal hu brei. So Shimon Echai and his son, Rabbi Lezer of Shimon, Toshu be Medrasha. So they went into hiding into the base medrash. Kol Yoima, every day, Havu Maisilahu, Dvisu. So his wife, Reb Shimon's wife, brought him rift of bread because of the Maya, jug of water. Bekarchi, and this would sustain him. They would eat it as a meal. Ki takiv zirasa, when the decree became more severe, the search for the fugitives intensified, and they were afraid that they would be discovered. Amalei lebrei. So Reb Shimon turned to his son Reb Lezer and he said, "You know, nashim datan kal aleim. Women can be easily swayed. I'm concerned. Dimra mitzarila. Perhaps the Romans will torture her. Or Megalilan, and she'll reveal to them our whereabouts. Let's find another hiding place." Azul, they went Toshu, they hid b'ma'arta, in a cave. So how did they sustain themselves in a cave? Israchesh nisa, a miracle occurred for them. Ivralu charuva, a carob tree was created for them, and immediately it produced forth its fruit. The Maharsha points out this is a nes b'deichnes, a miracle within a miracle, because not only was the charav tree just suddenly appear, but ordinarily a carob tree takes 70 years until it produces its fruits, and here they had the fruits immediately. So this was for eating. This was food. Ve'ena demaya, and also a spring was created for them, and they had what to eat and what to drink. They would shed their clothing. They would sit covered until their necks, b'chala, in sand, kul yayma, the entire day. Kul yayma, the entire day, garsi, they would sit and learn in this manner with the sand. However, in the time of davening, they need to dress properly, in a dignified manner. Lovshu, so they got dressed. Michsu, they covered themselves with matzlu, and they prayed. And then after they shed their clothing again. Why? So that the clothing would not get worn out from excessive use in the ma'ara. So they used it only minimally when they needed to. And how long did they stay there? Isvu Teresa Shani Ma'arta. They stayed there for 12 full years. When the 12 years were over, Elionah came along, become a Piskal Ma'arta, and he placed himself, he positioned himself at the mouth of the Ma'ara of the cave. Omar, and he declared, Mana loide levar Yochai, who's going to inform Bar Yochai, Shimon Yochai, the Meis Kesar, the Kesar died. Ubata Gzeirase, and his Gzeir decree became annulled. So they heard the good news. Nafku, they emerged from the cave and they re-entered civilization. What happened? Chazu inshi. So they noticed people, they called karvi vizar. They were karvi, they were plowing their field vizari, and they were sowing. So they were being involved in seeking livelihood, plowing and planting. Omar, so he declared, how can they do this? They came out from this intense spiritual experience, this otherworldly experience, where they were totally connected to Torah. In fact, we know that Rosh Shimon Yochai, during that period in the Ma'ara, he composed the Sefer HaZohar. This was some otherworldly experience, and they re-entered civilization. They were so shocked by what they saw. Omar, he said, Manichin Chaya Olam, how could they abandon, how could they ignore Chaya Olam, eternal life, and involve themselves in these types of pursuits of this Chayesha, this transitory life, this transitory world, this temporary Chayim of seeking a livelihood, a material livelihood. In fact, wherever their gaze landed, Miyad Nisra, immediately became incinerated, on a result of their sharp, powerful gaze. So they disapproved of being engaged in worldly matters. Says the Gemara, Yotza Baskel v'Amrlem, a heavenly voice rang out and called to them, this is why you emerged from your cave. You came back into this world to destroy it. Apparently, yes, you're living in a higher plane. You were living in a very intense spiritual world out there inside the cave, but you can't hold everybody else to your high standards. Go back into your cave. Apparently, this was as a einish for bringing destruction and havoc onto the world. Hodor, so went back. Ozol, they returned and they went back. They sat there another 12 months and they said, Amri, 12 months is enough. Mishpat Risham beGehenna Yudes Chodesh. The sentence accorded to Rishaim in Gehenna is at most 12 months. So we fulfilled our einish, our sentence is complete, and apparently we can go out. Yotza Baskel v'Amra, in fact, a Baskel rung out and said, Sumu Maraschem, come out, go out of your cave. Now, of course, they emerged. And once again, Kollel the son, he was very disappointed at what he saw, and wherever he destroyed by viewing disapprovingly, whichever location, whatever place Rav Elazar struck and destroyed, have a master of Shimon. Rav Shimon, he cured it. Apparently, he was older. He was older, and he was able to. He had the ability to tolerate things more than Rav Elazar, and he cured it. He fixed it back up. Amalai, and indeed, he turned to Rav Elazar and he told him, "B'nai, my son, Dai lo'olam, it is sufficient for the world, ani va'ata, to have you and me. We indeed are exclusively dedicated to absolute diligence in Torah. We're living on a higher plane. We can't hold everybody else on our higher standards. They're not right. They're not fitting for our standards. So you must tolerate the rest of the population." Incidentally, years ago when I was in Eretz Yisrael, so I followed this book that had all kinds of locations of the great Tanaim and Amoraim, and they had the description, the location of this Ma'ara, this cave in the town of Pekin. It was an Arab town, and we went there and we saw something which appeared to be a cave. And in fact, this is the most startling thing, next to that cave, there were these huge carob trees. Amazing. and down the hill there was a fresh spring of water. So perhaps this was they were the descendants of the carob tree, which was created for these tzaddikim and the stream of water. So in any case, this was the conclusion of the story. They came out of the cave, and they rejoined civilization. And Rav Shimon taught his son Rav Lezer how to relate to ordinary folks with tolerance and acceptance. Continues the Gemara. Ba'adi pani demal Shabbata. So it was getting close to darkness on Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos, close to Shabbos. They noticed Chazu. They noticed Ahu Saba, this elder man, Davanokit Trey. He was holding two madani asa, two bundles of myrtles of hadassim. V'roit ben hashmashes, running ben hashmashes. Amalei, they told him, Hani lamach, what do you need this for? Amalei l'koyah Shabbos, an honor of Shabbos. So they asked him, why do you need two? V'tiskelach b'chad. Why isn't one sufficient? So he told them, chad keneged zachar. One is meant to celebrate the pasuk of Zachar, the aspect of Zachar Shem Shabbos Lekachay. This was in the first Luchais. Remember, Yom Shabbos Lekachay, V'chad, and the other bundles connect the other pasuk in the second Luchais. Shomer, it's Yom Shabbos Lekachay. So Zachar and Shomer are two aspects of Shabbos. Zachar is more the positive aspect, for instance, reciting Kiddush. Shomer is the remembrance, meaning safeguarding of Shabbos, to be careful not to do malachas, work on Shabbos. They're two separate aspects and elements of Shabbos, and I intend to celebrate both of them. So I have two bundles of hadassim. Amalei lebrei. So now Rav Shimon turned to his son and says, Look how dear the mitzvahs are to Klal Yisrael. Although they don't necessarily have our level of scholarship and piety and absolute diligence, dedication to the Asmad of Torah. But take a look, Chazi, look how dear and cherished the mitzvahs on Yisrael. Look, this man is celebrating every nuance of Shabbos. He has two separate bundles for two separate aspects of Shabbos. Look how great, look how dear the mitzvahs are to Klal Yisrael. Yosef Datayu. In fact, as a result of this, their minds rested, and they were at ease that indeed Klal Yisrael is very dedicated to spirituality and Torah mitzvahs. Continues the Gemara. Shamar Pinchas ben Yair Chasnei. So when they came out of they emerged from the cave, Reb Pinchas ben Yair, who was the son-in-law, some say the father-in-law of Reb Shimon, heard the good news. V'nafik la'apei, and he went to greet him. Ailili beibani, he escorted him into the bathhouse. Have a ka'orech leila bisrei, was massaging his flesh. Chazi, he noticed avivei pili begufa, he had cracks in his body as a result of this cave experience. Have a kabachi. So Reb Pinchas was crying when he realized the terrible experience, the tsar, the pain that they went through. The kanasru dimas einei, and the demise of his eyes, the tears of his eyes were trickling. And they landed into the cracks of Reb Shimon's flesh, and they caused him to scream out. It was painful. These salty tears. Amarlei. So Reb Pinchas told him, woe to me that I've noticed that I've witnessed you in this unfortunate state. Amalei. So Reb Shimon responded, no, just the opposite. Ashrecha, fortunate you are, that you've seen me in this state. Why? Because have you not witnessed me in this state? This represents many years of seclusion, of immersion, of total diligence, total asmada in Torah. If not for this, you wouldn't have found in me this high state of Torah scholarship which I've attained when I was sitting in the Ma'ara. Says the Gemara, to illustrate the high level of Torah that he's reached. Let's take a look. The Meikara, initially, before the experience Kavamakshi, Reb Shimon Rechai Kushu, when Reb Shimon Rechai would offer a question, would ask a difficult question to Reb Pinchas. Reb Pinchas would respond with 12 possible solutions to the kasha. Reb Pinchas would answer with Tracy Piruki 12 answers. But after this experience, this cave experience, he wrote